Imagine, if you can, just one person being labeled by a major city with these, well, really audacious titles. First, extreme scofflaw,
Mm-hmm.
and then taking it even further, the city's worst landowner.
That's quite an escalation.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And picture this person operating through this complex web of companies, supposedly racking up millions and millions in unpaid fines.
Yeah.
Thousands of violations, letting blight, rats, hazardous waste just fester across hundreds of properties.
Hundreds. It's hard to grasp.
It really is. The scale of alleged neglect, it's frankly difficult to comprehend. So you might ask, how does one person rack up that much debt, cause so much blight, and seemingly get away with it for so long in a city like Chicago? Okay, let's unpack this. Today's deep dive, it's all about the city of Chicago's ongoing and I'd say increasingly aggressive legal fight against a Northbrook resident, Suzie B. Wilson.
Right.
So our mission today is really to explore how these fines and violations piled up so incredibly high. What's the reality of these properties we're talking about? And maybe most importantly, look at the strategies the city is now using to try and finally hold her accountable.
Despite these, well, complex legal maneuvers she's allegedly using.
Exactly. Maneuvers the city claims are designed specifically to dodge responsibility. It's a story about decay, legal fights, and the city trying to enforce accountability.
And what's really fascinating here, I think, and what makes this case so important for, how cities work is that intricate web of companies you mentioned. But it's not just the number of them. It's the, well, sophisticated legal strategies allegedly being used to shield the individual.
Right.
And then on the flip side, the equally determined and pretty innovative legal tactics Chicago is trying out to counter all that.
So this isn't just a few parking tickets then?
Oh, not at all. Far from it. This isn't just unpaid tickets or one rundown property. This cuts right to the core of the impact on communities. Well, you're talking public health, safety, the local economy, just the basic quality of life. And it highlights this huge challenge cities everywhere face, trying to enforce basic rules against blight when they meet, determined resistance.
And where are we getting our information for this dive?
We've dug into the court filings themselves, which lay out all the city's allegations in detail. Plus, there are these really compelling investigative reports from the Illinois Answers Project and Block Club Chicago. They really broke open the initial story, revealing the scope of it all.
Okay, so court docs and investigative journalism.
Yeah.
And it all seems to start, kind of surprisingly, with rats.
Yeah, rats.
Can you imagine living in a big city that's already fighting this, endless war on rats?
Which Chicago definitely is known for.
Right. It's a daily struggle for sanitation. And then you find out one person is allegedly just massively making the problem worse, undermining everything the city's trying to do.
Pretty galling when you put it like that.
That's where this seems to kick off. Chicago, like a lot of cities, has this well-known rodent problem.
Decades-long problem.
For years, the city's 311 line gets tens of thousands of rat complaints every single year. Just last year, 2023, over 55,000 calls for rodent control.
55,000! That's huge.
And it's not just gross, right? It's a public health issue. Rats carry diseases, leptospirosis, salmonella.
They get into food supplies, they damage property, chew wires, pipes.
Exactly. And they just create this feeling of, neglect and uncleanliness in neighborhoods. So when these journalists from Illinois Answers and Block Club started digging into where some of these constant complaints and code violations were coming from,
They followed the trail.
and it led to this really startling revelation. One person, Suzie B. Wilson, living in Northbrook, a suburb apparently at the center of what the city calls a vast real estate empire.
An empire built on allegedly neglected properties.
Precisely. Their initial investigation found she managed, or was tied to, companies that had piled up, get this, over $15 million in tickets for violations, going back as far as 2010.
15 million, wow.
And a lot of that was tied to these vacant, neglected properties. The city's court filings are really blunt about it. They allege Wilson and her 27 companies rarely, if ever, do anything at all to maintain these properties.
So basically accusing them of just letting things fall apart.
Yeah, it paints this picture of just systemic, maybe even deliberate neglect that hits Chicago residents right where they live.
And the city, facing this huge problem, they didn't really hold back in their legal language, did they?
Not at all.
They straight up called Wilson and her companies extreme scofflaws. And when you look at the numbers, you totally see why.
What are the latest numbers?
Well, current court filings allege Wilson and these companies owe the city over $9.3 million. That's from about 5,140 separate judgments.
5,000 judgments.
Yeah, 5,140. And here's the kicker. These specific violations, this $9.3 million debt, happened across more than 600 different properties in the city just since January 2018.
Just since 2018, across 600 properties.
Right. Think about the level of neglect needed to generate that many judgments that quickly across so many places. It's kind of mind-boggling.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, like you said, it's not just paperwork.
Not at all. It's about public health. It's about safety. It's about the basic quality of life. The court documents are explicit. They say these properties are a blight on the communities that must suffer their presence.
Strong words.
Very. And that they subject the residents of those communities to dangerous and unhealthy conditions.
Like what specifically?
Well, the rat infestations we talked about, obviously, but also accumulating trash, overgrown weeds, making places look abandoned, unsecured vacant buildings that can attract crime.
Right, become magnets for problems.
Exactly. And just general neglect that tanks property values and just demoralizes the whole neighborhood.
And that initial investigation, it pointed to a bigger city problem too, right?
Yeah, it suggested that Chicago was sort of struggling in its war on rats and blight, partly because it infrequently went after property owners, even when they got ticketed over and over.
So a systemic issue, perhaps.
Perhaps. And in that context, Wilson's companies just amassed this enormous debt, apparently the largest debt of any property owner in the city.
By far, they said.
By far. And the city's position now is crystal clear. They state Wilson has failed to pay any of those judgments and has done nothing to fix the significant underlying problems that cause so much harm to the city and its residents.
So alleging a long pattern of non-payment and inaction.
Precisely. A pattern stretching back years, affecting whole communities.
Okay, so we've got this picture. Widespread neglect, tons of violations, this mountain of unpaid debt.
Yeah.
The obvious question then is, what's the city actually doing about it?
Right. Are they just letting it pile up?
Are they just letting these neighborhoods deal with it? Thankfully, no. This whole situation finally pushed the city to make a pretty big, maybe even unprecedented legal move.
What was that?
Their first major sort of legal salvo to deal with this massive debt, all these individual judgments, was to ask a judge to do something kind of extraordinary.
Which was?
Consolidate them. Consolidate all those thousands of separate debts, all the fines, into one single enormous overarching debt.
Okay. Streamlining the whole mess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it from the city lawyer's perspective. Chasing thousands of small judgments across hundreds of properties. Each one needs its own paperwork, its own process.
It's an administrative nightmare. Completely inefficient.
Like trying to bail out a flooded basement with a teaspoon. Right? So, by consolidating, the city's stated reason in the court docs was so all the judgments can be pursued together in the most efficient manner possible.
Makes sense. Treat it as one big problem.
Yeah, it's more than just paperwork. It's a strategic shift. It seems designed to cut through years of alleged evasion and hold one person accountable for what they see as a single systemic issue.
It really makes you wonder, like you said, what it takes for a city to go for such a drastic step.
It really speaks volumes about how big they think the problem is and maybe how much obstruction they feel they've faced. And just when you think the story couldn't get, well, more disturbing than rats and widespread neglect, it escalates. Big time.
How so?
The city recently filed a brand new lawsuit. This one directly targets Suzie B. Wilson herself personally.
Piercing the corporate veil, so to speak.
Seems like that's the goal. They want to hold her directly accountable. And in doing that, they slap that even harsher label on her. The city's worst landowner.
Worse than extreme scofflaw. That's definitely dialing it up.
It is. It's a huge rhetorical and legal escalation. And the heart of this new lawsuit isn't just the general neglect. It focuses on one specific property, Wilson's company, Regal LLC, and a situation that's incredibly hazardous.
Right, and the details on this one property, they're really quite shocking. They really illustrate why the city ramped things up.
Where is it? What happened?
It's a vacant lot, 6722 South Ashland Avenue in West Englewood.
Okay, south side.
Yeah, a neighborhood already facing, its share of challenges. And for years, apparently, this empty lot just became this massive dumping ground for hundreds, maybe thousands, of decomposing rubber tires.
Tires just piled up.
Piled multiple feet high, according to the filings. Just imagine walking past that every day. Not a park, not a new building, just this huge, rotting mountain of black rubber.
Ugh. It's a potent symbol of neglect, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it raises that critical question. Okay, so it looks terrible, but what are the actual dangers of a giant tire dump like that?
Good question. What are they?
Well, the hazards are serious and layered. First, the obvious environmental stuff. Those piles are perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes.
Which carry diseases, West Nile.
Exactly. And they harbor rats, too, making that whole problem worse. Creates a public health risk right there.
Okay, pests. What else?
The big one, and probably why the city zeroed in on this, is the fire risk. Tire fires are notoriously dangerous.
Why is that?
They burn uncontrollably hot. Think 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe more. There's lots of air trapped in the piles, acts like a chimney, feeding the flames.
And hard to put out.
Incredibly hard. When the rubber melts, it generates this thick oil. You can't just douse it with water. It might even spread the burning oil. These things can smolder for weeks, even months.
Wow, weeks or months.
Yeah. And they release this thick, black, toxic smoke. It's full of hazardous chemicals, extremely dangerous for firefighters, for anyone living nearby. Terrible for air quality for miles.
This sounds terrifying.
It is. And the environmental harm doesn't stop there. Even just sitting in the sun, tire piles can release methane gas, a greenhouse gas, and leach nasty chemicals into the soil and groundwater over time.
So a ticking time bomb, environmentally speaking.
Pretty much. And the city's claims about when the tires were removed are also really telling.
What do they say?
They allege the tires only got cleaned up after the city had already issued multiple violations, sent formal pre-litigation letters warning them, and crucially, after the city had actually drafted the legal complaint against Wilson and her company about the tires.
So only when the legal hammer was about to fall.
That's what the city suggests, a pattern of being reactive, not proactive. Only acting when forced, basically, rather than dealing with a dangerous mess beforehand.
And they're tying this specific tire dump to the broader pattern.
Yes, exactly. The lawsuit frames this as part of her alleged larger failure to maintain hundreds of vacant lots that plague some of the city's most vulnerable neighborhoods, mostly on the south and west sides.
Areas that can least afford more blight.
Right. These are often places struggling with disinvestment, poverty, crime. Blight, like a massive tire dump, just makes everything worse, holds the community back.
Reading the city's filings, you can almost feel the frustration boiling over.
Yeah, the language is strong.
They don't hold back at all. I mean, quoting directly, she does not care that she is endangering the lives of countless city residents and causing significant environmental harm.
That's not your typical dry legalese. That sounds personal. Yeah.
It does. It sounds like sheer exasperation. And then they follow it with this, almost like a battle cry. Wilson's reign of terror over humorous city neighborhoods must end. Enough is enough.
Reign of terror, wow.
Yeah. And this new lawsuit, it's not just symbolic. They're suing for a massive amount now.
How much?
More than $28.7 million. That's tied to the tire dump and other violations across the board.
$28.7 million. That's a huge jump from the earlier numbers.
It is. And Regal LLC, the company tied to the tire dump, that specific entity allegedly owes over $250,000 just on its own.
Okay.
And just to hammer the point home, the city reiterates its finding that Wilson has more judgments against her businesses than anyone else that owns property in Chicago by a magnitude of 10 or more.
10 times more. Not just a little more, 10 times.
Right. It paints this picture of a problem that's just completely off the charts compared to anyone else. Really explains why the city felt they had to escalate things this dramatically. So we've got the scale, the shocking conditions like the tire dump. But the city isn't just saying she's negligent. They're alleging it's more calculated than that.
Right. They're suggesting a deliberate strategy to avoid responsibility.
What are these sophisticated attempts they're talking about? How does someone actually build this kind of legal maze? Is it just paperwork?
Well, it's more than just shuffling papers. The core challenge for the city seems to be navigating Wilson's alleged use of limited liability companies, LLCs.
Okay, LLCs. How are they allegedly being used here?
The city claims Wilson seeks shelter behind her sham corporations and limited liability companies. They accuse her of trying to defraud the city by cycling her properties through different limited liability companies.
And the goal of that cycling?
The city believes her thinking is that this strategy relieves her of her duty to maintain these properties and thus ultimately relieves her of any liability. Basically, hide behind the corporate structure.
So using a legal tool for potentially unintended purposes.
That's the allegation. It's a common enough tactic, trying to shield personal assets, but the city argues the way it's being done here and the timing is particularly problematic.
You mentioned LLCs have legitimate uses, though.
Oh, absolutely. They're designed to limit personal liability for business owners, protect their homes and savings if the business fails or gets sued. It encourages people to start businesses. They're a very common, very legitimate structure.
But they can be misused.
They can. They can be exploited to hide who really owns or controls things, making it hard to hold anyone accountable. And that's what the city is claiming is happening on a grand scale here. It's not just simple paperwork. It's allegedly a strategic manipulation of corporate law. Let's break down what they claim she did.
Okay, what are the tactics?
Tactic 1 seems to be a rapid changing of management. Remember when Illinois Answers and Block Club first published their investigation linking Wilson's name to all these companies and debts?
Yeah, late 2023. Put her in the spotlight.
Right. Well, less than a week after that story broke, her name was suddenly removed as the manager from those companies' official corporate filings.
Less than a week. That sounds fast.
Extremely fast. The city sees that timing as a direct attempt to distance herself the moment there was public scrutiny.
Okay, so who took over as manager?
Not another person. Instead, the new managers listed were other limited liability companies, and crucially, these new LLCs were based in South Dakota.
South Dakota. Why is that significant?
Because South Dakota has corporate record laws that are famously opaque. They don't require companies to publicly list the names of the individuals who actually manage or own them.
Ah, so it creates a layer of anonymity.
A deep layer. When the city tries to serve legal papers or figure out who's really in charge, who to hold responsible, they hit this wall. It's like trying to find someone who keeps changing masks and hiding behind a curtain makes direct accountability incredibly difficult.
Who's the contact person then? The agent?
The current registered agent for these companies is apparently an attorney who Wilson had used in a completely different, unrelated lawsuit, which to the city just reinforces the connection back to her despite the corporate shuffling.
Okay, so changing management to anonymous LLCs. What's tactic 2?
Tactic 2, often used alongside the first, is cycling properties between different companies.
Moving the ownership around.
Exactly. That West Englewood lot, the one with the tires. It's a prime example of this alleged pattern.
What's its history?
Okay, so Wilson herself first got it back in 1995 through a tax deed sale. That happens when someone doesn't pay property taxes, the city sells the lien, and eventually ownership transfers.
Okay, so she got it cheap, probably.
Likely. Then she deeded it to a company called Random LLC, one of the businesses the city claims she manages. Later, in 2008, Random LLC transferred it to Regal LLC.
Regal LLC, the one being sued now over the tires.
Precisely. And here's where the timing gets interesting again. Just days after that Illinois Answers report identify Wilson's alleged role managing these companies.
Let me guess. Something happened with Regal.
You got it. Regal quickly transferred its management, not necessarily ownership, but management control, to newly created LLCs based, yet again, in South Dakota.
So another layer of anonymity right when the heat was on.
That's the city's interpretation. And there's this one detail that's just, well, remarkable in its alleged audacity.
What's that?
One of these new South Dakota companies set up to manage her Chicago properties is named FCOC, LLC.
FCOC.
Yeah. And the city's lawsuit explicitly states, on information or belief, the acronym COC and FCOC refers to the city of Chicago.
Okay, and the F.
City officials have publicly declined to speculate on what the F might stand for. They're leaving that interpretation entirely up to us.
Wow. That's quite something, if true. Talk about alleged defiance.
It really speaks volumes about the kind of challenge and, frankly, attitude the city believes it's up against.
So beyond this big new lawsuit against Wilson personally and Regal LLC, the city's been fighting on other fronts too, right? Trying to consolidate those earlier debts.
Absolutely. It's a multi-pronged attack. As we mentioned, they're still working on consolidating that initial $9.3 million in judgments, mostly the rat tickets and general code violations, into one single case for efficiency.
Right, to pursue it all at once.
Exactly. And even before that, last year, they had already gone to court and managed to consolidate the original massive debt uncovered by the journalists, that $15 million plus figure, into 27 separate lawsuits.
27 lawsuits.
Yeah, one for each of the different companies they had identified as being part of her network at the time. So they're throwing significant legal resources and strategic thinking at this, trying to untangle this incredibly complex web from multiple angles to finally get accountability for the blight these properties represent.
And this whole saga even pulls in other big city players, doesn't it? Like the CTA.
It does. The Chicago Transit Authority, the CTA, they're actually in their own separate legal fight with Wilson, and the city of Chicago has formally joined that battle, supporting the CTA.
Why is the CTA involved?
Because they desperately need 8 specific properties that are owned by companies within Wilson's alleged real estate empire.
Needed for what?
for the huge Red Line extension project. This is a massive $3.6 billion infrastructure project to extend the Red Line L train 5.6 miles further south down to 130th Street.
That's a major project for the South Side.
Huge. It's meant to bring vital transit access to underserved areas, help commutes, hopefully spark economic growth, but they need this land.
And the problem is getting the land from Wilson's companies.
The sticking point, maybe unsurprisingly, is money. The CTA needs to acquire these properties, likely through eminent domain, but the two sides apparently can't agree on a price.
So her property holdings are potentially obstructing a major city project.
That seems to be the situation. It just highlights how complicated things get when dealing with someone who holds so much property, especially someone apparently willing to engage in legal battles.
And she has sued the city before, hasn't she?
Yes, that's right. One of her companies actually sued the city, claiming it was unconstitutional for Chicago to fine them for not cutting weeds on a property.
Unconstitutional weeds. How did that go?
A federal judge threw the case out, dismissed it, basically upheld the city's right to enforce its basic maintenance ordinances.
Okay. And have Wilson or her lawyers said anything publicly about all these latest allegations, the tire dump, the $28 million lawsuit?
No, not really. Reporters have tried, but messages left for Wilson and her attorneys haven't been returned. They've generally declined public comment, citing the ongoing litigation.
Which is pretty standard in these situations.
Yeah, very common legal practice when facing multiple lawsuits like this.
Okay, so let's pull back a bit. We've gone through the legal maze, the alleged tactics, the specific examples like the rats and the tires. What does this all actually mean for the people living in Chicago, especially in those neighborhoods where these properties are concentrated?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Beyond the legal drama.
When we talk about these hundreds of properties, where are they mostly located?
The filings consistently point to them being mostly vacant properties in the south and west sides of Chicago, often concentrated in what the city itself calls some of the city's most vulnerable neighborhoods.
So areas already dealing with other significant challenges.
Exactly. Communities often facing lower economic investment, higher poverty rates, maybe less access to services.
And for the people living there, this isn't just some news story.
Not at all. This is their daily environment. Imagine walking out your door and seeing broken windows, boarded up houses, weeds taller than you that attract rodents or hide illegal dumping, piles of trash blowing around, vacant buildings that feel unsafe, that could be used for crime or catch fire. And then add the specific horrors we discussed, the constant worry about rats in the alley, mosquitoes breeding in standing water from neglect, or the truly terrifying possibility of something like that tire dump going up in flames.
It sounds incredibly stressful and demoralizing.
It has to be. It's not just an eyesore. It's a constant weight, a threat to health, to safety. It impacts property values, sure, but more importantly, it impacts people's sense of dignity, security, and hope for their own community. It just makes existing problems worse and hinders any efforts at revitalization.
So connecting this back to the bigger picture, what does this whole case represent for the city?
Well, I think this represents a really significant, maybe even unprecedented effort by Chicago to enforce accountability on a scale you rarely see.
Because of the complexity, the LLCs.
Partly, yes. The challenge of navigating these complex corporate structures, especially when they involve out-of-state registrations in places like South Dakota with opaque laws, it's immense. Trying to figure out who is truly responsible when liabilities are allegedly hidden behind layers of LLCs is a massive hurdle for any city government.
So this case really shines a light on that problem.
It absolutely does. It raises these fundamental questions about corporate responsibility versus community impact, about beneficial ownership, who really owns and controls these things, and ultimately, are our current laws strong enough to stop property owners from basically abandoning their duties to keep places safe and healthy?
And the city's aggressive stance now, consolidating debt, suing Wilson personally.
That signals, I think, a major shift. They seem determined to tackle these long-standing problems of urban neglect and what they call deadbeat companies head-on, even if it requires novel legal strategies and significant resources.
Could this set a precedent?
It very well could. This isn't just about Suzie B. Wilson anymore. If Chicago succeeds here, it could provide a powerful roadmap for other cities across the U.S. facing similar issues with widespread blight, absentee landlords, and owners allegedly using corporate loopholes to avoid responsibility.
So a test case for urban governance, really.
Absolutely. A test of balancing corporate rights with civic duties, and a test of a city's ability to hold powerful individuals accountable for the real-world impact they have on communities.
It really is just an incredible, sprawling story when you lay it all out.
Mm.
You got these labels: extreme scofflaw, city's worst landowner,
Mm.
millions in fines, thousands of violations, rats, that horrifying tire dump.
All tied together with these complex legal moves involving LLCs.
Right, allegedly designed to avoid blame. And then the city's response.
Consolidating debt, suing directly, basically saying, like you quoted, enough is enough.
And this really leaves us with a big question to think about as this all plays out, doesn't it?
What's that? How do we as a society find the right balance? We have legal structures like LLCs for good reasons to encourage business, but how do we balance that with the absolute necessity for property owners to maintain safe, healthy environments for everyone?
It's a tough balance.
It is. And this case highlights that ongoing struggle for cities. How do you hold individuals accountable when they can allegedly hide behind this maze of companies? What does this mean long-term for city planning, for public health, and especially for environmental justice in those neighborhoods that always seem to bear the brunt of this kind of neglect?
These aren't easy questions, are they?
No, but they're vital ones. They go way beyond just this one legal fight in Chicago.
So what stands out to you listening to all this? How does a story like this shape how you think about civic responsibility, about what it takes to keep communities safe and healthy, and the huge challenges involved?
Yeah.
This deep dive, it feels like just one chapter in a much bigger ongoing story about our cities, about accountability, and that constant difficult work of fighting blight and demanding better.